Let's get to know more about the Wisconsin Badgers who come into this home game against Illinois, 2-2, 0-1 in the Big Ten, a slow start. But they had a slow start last year before a pretty good finish. And Jim Polzin going to let us know a little bit more about the Badgers. He's a columnist for the Wisconsin State Journal. And Jim, let's just dive right into the big storyline here, shall we? Bret Bielema. It's a great TV storyline. Probably a lot of interest at both sides of this. But 10 years after leaving, surprisingly, after winning 3 Big Ten titles, he's coming back to Madison. He said this will be the third time since he left for Arkansas. What do you expect the reaction will be at Camp Randall Stadium?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, a lot of time has passed. 10 years is a lot of time. Wisconsin's program has essentially maintained, success. It's not like they've fallen apart since he left, so I don't think there's any hard feelings that way. It's a weird week because, I think a majority of the focus this week is on that Ohio State game and how bad it got and really kind of there's a lot of state of the program type questions I'm getting right now after that loss and the Washington State loss. So, um, you know, the Bielema storyline is not by any means an afterthought, but I don't think it's as big as maybe it would have been if there weren't so many other things going on right now.
How do people look back at Bielema's years and how he left?
Yeah, I mean, the way he left was one thing. I think it got the it got even bigger a couple years later when Wisconsin lost to Arizona State and Jen Bielema sent the famous karma tweet. I think that's when the hard feelings really got, bad. Um, when he left, I think people were shocked. It was a weird run for Wisconsin because they had 3 straight Rose Bowls, but had lost 2 of them. A lot of people around here thought they had underachieved to some degree in 2011 when you've got a quarterback like Russell Wilson and you still lose 3 games. So again, 10 years is we're going back a little bit, but I remember a lot of grumbling at that time that, that it wasn't quite maximizing things, even though they were winning, titles and going to the Rose Bowl. So I don't know that, there's probably a good chunk of this fan base that wasn't all that sad to see him go. You never like to be the one that gets broken up with for someone prettier, right? But um, I don't know that there was a lot of hard feelings that way. Like I said, like I think the thing that really set people off was the Jen Bielema tweet. But again, that's I think bygones are bygones, and here we are a decade later.
Yeah, and here we are a decade later where Wisconsin is still a really good program. The most consistent in the Big Ten West. I know Iowa is right there with them. But you mentioned it. People are asking you about the state of the program in
Yeah.
Wisconsin. This is 2 years of slow starts. So what are fans upset about other than just maybe not being a 10-win team, the Big Ten West champion?
There's an assortment of things, Washington State game, there was penalties, and there seems to be too much of that. If you kind of look back over these last, really, it started. 2020 was a bad season, 4-3. COVID really messed that year up. The year before that, they went to the Rose Bowl, but they were 6-0 at one point. Illinois went down to Illinois and got beat in a really surprising loss. Got drilled by Ohio State the next week. So that's kind of you can start really anywhere in terms of this rut is what I've been calling it. It's kind of a program rut. I mean, you could go back as far as 2018. They were 8-5. I think the consistent theme is that they're beating themselves a lot, and that's something this program's never really done, or at least when it's been at its best, it's a program that doesn't beat itself. And I think we've seen a little bit too much of that. A few 2 losses to teams you don't think they're going to lose to. I mean, Washington State being one of them. So it's just kind of the grumbling has gotten louder and louder. And after the Ohio State loss, again, like nobody thought they were going to go in and beat Ohio State, like nobody. But for it to be 28-0, 2 minutes into the second quarter was an eye opener. And I think people are kind of curious about the direction of this program and really who should be running it.
That's interesting. So
Probably
Paul,
sounds crazy, right?
yeah,
Jeremy, probably
no,
sounds
I mean,
crazy to someone outside of Madison, right? And
exactly. But
yeah,
that's what happens. Like Illinois fans just say, "Get me to a bowl game every year, I'll be happy." And I say, well, at some point you're going to want more than that. And Wisconsin fans are used to more than that. So Paul Chryst has a new offensive coordinator. Obviously, Jim Leonhard. We'll get into him a little bit. Like he's one of the most overqualified defensive coordinators in the country. But what do you think is holding them back from kind of owning the West, because Northwestern's come up, Iowa's come up, Minnesota this year. It seems like people are taking advantage of Wisconsin being still good, but not great.
yeah. I will say this. I think part of it is if you even compare the Bielema and Chryst eras, and I'm going to do that later this week. Um, there are teams that are much better than they were. Minnesota being one of them. I mean, Minnesota now is much better than it was a decade ago. If you look across the Big Ten, Ohio State now is they were good 10 years ago, but Urban Meyer and Ryan Day have elevated that program to a new level. Michigan is better than it was 10 years ago. Indiana is better. So I mean, there's like 4 programs that are legitimately much better, and I think you can make a case that some are a little bit better. So I think the West has gotten better around Wisconsin. I don't think Wisconsin's elevated like other teams have. So I think that's part of it. I mean, you always point to recruiting and quarterback play, right? I mean, a lot of people. I mean, you saw 2020 Graham Mertz, that opener. Everybody's like, "Yep, that's the guy. That's the 4-star guy that we've always wanted, and he's going to be the Messiah that we think that we thought he was going to be." And then really, it hasn't. It's gone the other way since then. So I think anytime you struggle at quarterback, especially not just quarterback, but offensively, they've really struggled. The offensive line has seen a drop off. I mean, we're used to some really good offensive lines around here, and don't think we've had a really good one in quite some time. So it's a lot of little things. It's not just one thing. I don't think. In fact, the funny thing is, people rag on Paul Chryst as a recruiter. If you believe in recruiting rankings, 19, 20, and 21 were 3 of the best classes in this program's history. So that should be the base. That's the kind of the leaders of this team, and that's maybe why it's a little bit frustrating to Wisconsin fans that that 2019 class should have some stars in it, and it's got starters, but I don't know that any true stars have emerged.
Yeah, they just seem a little bit more vulnerable. Like you
Yeah.
said, offensive line wise. Last year their linebackers were great. I'm not sure they are this year. So I'll dive into that. But let's go with Mertz, because he looked like a Heisman contender in that pandemic game. I remember it vividly, just the entire atmosphere of it. But he just tore up Lovie Smith's defense and really set the tone of what that season would be for Illinois. But I looked up the stats since then. Against Power 5 teams, he has 17 touchdowns to 18 interceptions. So what has been the Graham Mertz experience now in year 3 of him as a starter?
Yeah, I mean the one that the number stands out there is the 18 interceptions, and there's been some lost fumbles in there too. I mean, he really struggled to take care of the ball, which has been a trademark around here of there haven't been a lot of great quarterbacks other than Russell Wilson, but guys take care of the ball. They don't beat themselves, and that's been one big problem. I thought he had kind of turned a corner, played really well the first 3 games this season. Even against Washington State, that loss, I would not pin that on him. So to take a big step back against Ohio State, and I understand Ohio State's probably going to do that to a lot of teams, but that was somewhat discouraging because I thought he had turned a corner, and we'll see if he can bounce back from it. Um, you know, a lot of little things haven't helped him either. He had his first year, John Budmeyer was the offensive coordinator and then the quarterbacks coach. Budmeyer left. Last year, Paul Chryst went back and coached the quarterbacks. And this year, Bobby Engram is coaching the quarterbacks and leading the offense. So different voices, which probably doesn't help. There hasn't been a ton of continuity. So that's one possible explanation. I don't know. He's never really talked about this, but there is a tremendous amount of pressure on the guy because of the expectations that greeted him when he got here. And I don't know if that's rattled him a little bit. It comes off as a really confident guy. But at some point you've got to produce, and he has just not done that consistently, and that's been the biggest problem.
It's still a good running attack. Braelon Allen looks fantastic. He started it last year against Illinois, where they ran for 390 yards against Illinois. You mentioned the offensive line. Like, how does Allen stack up against some of the running back greats they've had, and what about this offensive line? How do you think they're holding up right now?
Yeah, I mean, Allen, the interesting thing about Allen is he just wasn't he came here, they thought he was going to play linebacker. I mean, he was a safety in high school. That's kind of the initial projection for position wise, and then got, became a line. They're like, oh, he's just too big. He can't be a safety. And so I think when he signed that, they thought he was going to be a linebacker, and then had played some running back in high school, and then it just kind of took off last fall, and they really needed him. Like you mentioned, that turnaround last year, a lot of that was because of him. He just, he's a different type of guy, 6'2", 240. He's got some good speed still, and I think he could, I hesitate to put him in that Ron Dane, Jonathan Taylor, Melvin Gordon. That trio is kind of up there until proven otherwise. I think Braelon's kind of that next step, but he's only 18. He's only a sophomore, so there's plenty of time. The offensive line is a tricky one. I mean, Joe Rudolph was the offensive line coach. He left after last season. I think it was probably good timing because I just think they needed a different voice. They moved Bob Bostad over from inside linebackers coach to offensive line coach. And Bostad was one of their, if you look back at some of the great lines in the 2010, 2011 era, Bostad was the coach then. He's got a great track record. And, I hesitate. He's 4 games into his second stint as offensive line coach, and I hesitate to pin this all on him because I do think some of it is just creating a culture, and he does things a little bit differently than Joe Rudolph did, and I think that's going to take some time. What hasn't helped is injuries. I mean, they were without their 2 tackles last week against Ohio State. Tanner Bortolini, who's started at right guard last week, he missed the first couple games, injured himself in camp. So they just haven't had continuity. And I think, that group, especially 5 guys have to work as one, and we just haven't seen that. So I think that's something, that's one of those check back in a month and see. I think it still has a chance to be a decent line, but they need it to happen in a hurry.
Tight end Clay Cundiff is out. And what's that mean for their passing attack? Because it seems like he was really coming on, and we know tight ends have crushed Illinois before Bielema got here, but it's kind of something that Illinois hasn't faced a lot yet this year is a good tight end. So what's that injury mean for them?
Yeah, it's a big loss. He was, Clay Cundiff had made some plays, and Jake Ferguson was a fixture here in the lineup for 4 years, and that was kind of one of the question mark positions coming in, and Cundiff had solidified that to some degree. The 2 guys that are going to play a lot are Hayden Rucci, who's more of a blocking back, he can catch the ball a little bit when needed, and then Jack Eschenbach is the one that's really going to have to step up. Which is the weird thing is, like, when Ferguson graduated, I think people thought Eschenbach would be kind of the next in line, and Cundiff kind of had passed him by. So this is a chance for Eschenbach to kind of step up. They really need that position to be good. And then, some young guys in that group, I just don't know if they're ready yet. It's a little bit of an uncertain position. And that's, talk about coaching changes. That's another one where Mickey Turner was the coach last year. They made him the recruiting coordinator, and now Chris Herring is the tight ends coach. Chris Herring has never coached tight ends. I think he used to be the special teams coach. So it's a little bit weird. It's a little bit of a hodgepodge offensive staff this year. Interesting the way Paul Chryst chose to kind of make some changes and insert guys that had never really coached at that specific position. And how much of that is contributing to these offensive woes early in the season, don't know, because these offensive woes are kind of, they've been a 2 or 3 year thing.
We mentioned Jim Leonhard. I'm amazed that guy is not a head coach somewhere, or the NFL DC. He just loves it there, huh?
Yeah, I mean, he's had chances to leave as a head coach. He turned down the Packers defensive coordinator position too. And he's got 3 young boys, family, young family, and loves it here. I always get questions like, is he the next head coach here? And I've been pretty consistent saying, yes, he is. I don't know when that's going to be.
Yeah.
Paul Chryst is 56 years old, and who knows, what his future holds. But Leonard's had chances to leave, and I just think it's going to take a perfect situation. A little bit like Greg Gard in the basketball side. I mean, Greg had some opportunities, Mac and and mid majors, and just nothing was perfect, and it ended up working out well for him, right? I mean, Bo retires, Greg gets a job, and it's, he's doing a solid job. And I think Leonard is kind of in the same thing. He's not going to take a job just to take one. It's going to have to be absolutely perfect, and he's got he's had a lot of interest from a lot of interesting places, and has always said no.
Yeah, I saw Bob Osmus from the News Gazette had Barry Alvarez said that Josh Whitman called about somebody before he mentioned Bielema. I would
Yeah,
imagine that would be
I would. That's kind of the that was kind of the word here.
yeah. Ohio State's offense is otherworldly, Jim. Right? Like I mean, I think we knew they were going to be able to score on Jim in that defense, but do you take anything away from that defensive performance, or is that an outlier for what has consistently been one of the best defenses in the country?
I think if you look back at Wisconsin's success over the last 5 years defensively, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm taking anything away from them, but they have done it in large part against some pretty average offenses, right? The Big Ten West is not one of those divisions that has a ton of great offenses. It's not the SEC West, so I think the numbers are kind of skewed a little bit by that. And when they've gone up against the Ohio States of the world, it's been much more difficult. Now, Jim Leonard was saying earlier today, like an hour ago or so, he brought up a good point, is that in the past against Ohio State, they've played them pretty strong early, got tired out, right? They just run out of bodies and guys get tired. It was the other way around on Saturday night. It was ugly from the start, and he thought guys were just kind of trying to caught up in the moment, trying to do a little bit too much and seeing ghosts, as he put it. So, and I think not completely shocking if you consider that they were returning only three starters. They're replacing 8 guys, and Leo Chanel and Jack Sanborn are playing in the NFL. They had some really experienced cornerbacks, so not an ideal situation this year. They thought, this has always been kind of a plug and play. I just think it's going to take a little bit more time. Another guy I should mention, Hunter Wolder, safety, who was not one of those returning starters, but a guy who was absolutely penciled in to be a starter. He got hurt earlier in the season and is out. So, just a lot of little things, but Ohio State's good. And I expected it to be a really, really difficult task on Saturday night. Just didn't see it going touchdown, 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 touchdown right off the bat.
Well, Jim, what do you think of this matchup with Illinois, a team that has looked more balanced, obviously way more competitive since that Wisconsin beatdown last year? A team that can throw the ball a little bit, but a really good defense so far. What do you think about this matchup for Wisconsin? Obviously looking to get back in the win column against a team they've dominated up in Madison.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big difference last year, you mentioned it, is like, you didn't have to worry about the pass with Illinois, and you really focus on the run. And when you can make a team one-dimensional, it's just so much easier. They don't have that luxury this year. I mean, Illinois can do both, and I look at this as a tough matchup. Like, I think it's going to be a touchdown type game. The one X factor for me from a Wisconsin perspective is, how do you respond to that Ohio State loss? And that can go one of two ways. I mean, that can be the line in the sand type game, and you put together a great week of practice and come out energized and with a point to prove, or it can go the other way and it sticks with you. One loss can turn into 2, and if you don't be careful. So I don't know. I mean, predicting that is anybody's guess. I'm just can't get inside their minds right now. There's a lot of negativity floating around outside the program. I don't know how much of that has infiltrated the locker room, and that's, to me, that's a slow start when your old coach is in town on Saturday is going to bring out the boo birds and could really make this an ugly atmosphere. So that's one thing I'll be watching the first 15 minutes and into halftime.
This is why I like catching up with you guys, Jim, because I didn't understand the heat was that hot for Paul Chryst. So, like, how hot is it there?
Yeah, it's a great question. Somebody asked me this week, like, because I in my column last week, Saturday night, I refused to use the word hot seat with him, because Wisconsin's so different than a lot of places. You look at his record, just in whole, and he's 67-25, I think, right? I don't know what that winning percentage is, but it's somewhere around 70%, right? Wisconsin's not going to fire someone who's won 70% of his games. It's that not that type of place. And yet I do think if you're the athletic director, Chris McIntosh, and maybe some of the more influential people, you at least have to take a look at that 67-25 and break it down into how it got there. I mean, it was like 22-4 at one point, I want to say. I mean, I don't have that numbers in front of me, but it's the last 4 seasons are 8-5, 10-4, 4-3, 9-4, and then 2-2, right? So it's a lot of those losses have come since then. And again, like, not to reiterate what I said earlier, but the league's gotten better around him. That's fair. He's also lost a couple that you don't think he should, at home to BYU and at home to Washington State. And there just hasn't been a couple recruiting classes in a row now that have been really shaky. So there just haven't been a lot of positive floating around this program. And the tough thing is, and for me, and I'm certainly not the one making the decision, is this rut something that you can get out of? Because it's happened before here, Jeremy. Like, Bret Bielema's second year was 9-4, third year was 7-6, and it was like the sky was falling around here. And then they got back to winning 10 games, and then a couple Rose Bowls, and everything was all right. Barry Alvarez had a 3-year run in the early 2000s where it was like 7-6, 8-6. It was a 3-year run of mediocrity. Yeah. He got out of that. So it's happened here before, and I think what you need to do is look at and say, is Paul Chryst the guy that can get out of this rut? And again, like, if I had my crystal ball, I would use it. It's really difficult, and it's really, for me as a reporter and kind of trying to stay subjective, it's hard not being stuck in the moment, Jeremy. And the moment right now feels really bad because of what happened Saturday night, what happened 2-3 weeks ago against Washington State. So you kind of got to let this play out, I think, and see how the rest of the season goes, and then reevaluate.
Yeah. 9-7 over the last 3 years in Big Ten play, which that includes the COVID year, which I don't know how to evaluate that, but that is interesting when you put it in the context there. Before I let you go, Jim, obviously a lot of Illinois basketball fans, that's what they look forward to most. Wisconsin obviously has an all-time great to replace in Johnny Davis, but what are they expecting for Wisconsin basketball, who, it's hard to project this Big Ten that I don't think has any elite teams. I don't know if it has many bad teams. It's hard to pick Wisconsin high, but it's just the program you give the benefit of the doubt. So do you think they'll be Wisconsin and over exceed expectations again?
I mean, if I had to make a prediction right now, I would say somewhere in the 6th, 7th, 8th place range. And I'm a little gun shy doing that, Jeremy, because like last year they were picked 10th, right? And I wasn't in that preseason poll, but I certainly didn't disagree with it. I thought that was completely fair because we didn't know what Johnny Davis was at that point. Right. And then they completely exceeded expectations and want to share the Big Ten title. I don't see quite that. I think Johnny was such a difference maker. I'm not sure they have that. I mean, Chucky Hepburn's a really good player. Tyler Wall is a really good player. The one guy I think that could make a huge difference in their prospects is Stephen Crowell, who's going to be a junior, and that's typically when Wisconsin big men make the jump. So if he can make a jump, then you've got 3 really good starters. Depth is an issue. You need some guys that haven't played much of a role to step into pretty big roles, and so that's the one thing you always wonder about. But if those the 3 guys I mentioned, can be good, I think this team is pretty solid. It's gonna have to win differently. I just think they're gonna have to win low scoring games. It's gonna be a little bit like the old Wisconsin teams, pre Final Four runs, those type of teams where you gotta win games in the low 60s and 50s, and it's gonna be ugly at times. But I think they can defensively. I think they can be really good.
Jim Polzin, Wisconsin State Journal. Jim, always appreciate the time, man. I'll see you up in Madison on Saturday.
Yeah, good seeing you, Jeremy. Thanks a lot.